The fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical song, a sound Danielle Ross had learned to filter out 15 years ago. She stood at the med cart on the 4th floor of Seattle General's ICU, her hands moving through the familiar choreography of 8 a.m. rounds, checking 4 lines, adjusting infusion rates, noting vitals with the kind of precision that made newer nurses stop and watch. Nobody watched her hands anymore. They just assumed competence. They had no idea what competence actually looked like. O2 sat holding at 94, she said quietly to the resident shadowing her, a nervous kid named Prakash who flinched every time an alarm sounded. Wean the high flow down to 6 liters. Monitor for desaturation. Prakash scribbled notes like she was reading scripture. She wasn't. She was just a nurse. Just a civilian nurse in scrubs with a limp that nobody asked about and a scar on her left shoulder blade shaped like shrapnel that nobody would ever see. The antiseptic bite of the hospital never went away. After 15 years, it had become part of her baseline, the smell of bleach and bodily fluid and the particular staleness that only ICUs held, where sick people breathed recycled air and fought infections invisible to the naked eye. She'd learned to read that smell. A sharper note meant infection. A sweeter taint meant metabolic failure. Her nose was a diagnostic tool she'd never mention in a chart because civilians didn't work that way. Civilians didn't trust instinct. Civilians trusted numbers and protocols and the chain of command. The chain of command. She almost smiled. Room for 12 was 2 doors down. She'd seen the admit notice 15 minutes before her shift. Marine Sergeant Major Carlos Vega, admitted to ICU with severe combat-related complications, pneumothorax partially treated in transport, possible tension pneumothorax developing, congestive response to fluid resuscitation, cardiac function compromised. The admitting physician had written it in clinical language, all bullet points and objective findings. Professional. Distant. Completely inadequate. She'd read the name and stopped moving for exactly 2 seconds. Carlos Vega. Sergeant Major. 23 years old on the admit form, which meant he was probably 28 or 29 now, which meant he was born approximately 29 years ago, which meant he would have been 8 years old in 2016 when the compound outside Bagram took direct fire and a wall collapsed and something small and screaming was buried under rubble while Danielle Ross was extracting him, pulling him up by his shirt collar. His small body limp until it wasn't, until he gasped and coughed and his eyes went wide with the specific kind of terror that only children experienced in war zones. She'd noted the assignment request quietly. No emotion in her voice. Just a statement, I'll take for 12. She didn't request patience. The rotation was random. Protocol was protocol. But nobody stopped her because nobody stopped Danielle Ross. Nobody questioned her. Nobody remembered her at vending machines or in the break room or at the coffee station where other nurses gossiped about their lives. She existed in a kind of professional silence, competent, invisible, so thoroughly unremarkable that people forgot they'd seen her within minutes of her leaving the room. Dr. Marcus Whitfield had not forgotten. He was watching from the nurse's station when she pulled Vega's chart, watching with the kind of attention that made the back of her neck register a threat. Whitfield was the surgical director, which meant he was important, which meant his attention mattered, which meant she'd made a mistake by requesting 412. His eyes were the color of pale ice, the kind that looked clean until you looked closer and saw the fractures running through it. Danielle moved through Vega's room with mechanical precision. The patient was sedated, intubated, his breathing synchronized to the ventilator's rhythm. The machine wheezed its mechanical breath into his lungs while his body lay still, devastated by whatever combat injury had brought him here. She checked the needle decompression site where they'd relieved the pneumothorax, verified the chest tube placement, calculated the remaining fluid balance. His cardiac monitor showed sinus rhythm. Stable for now. That would change if the tension redeveloped. That would change if she wasn't watching. She was always watching. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the scar on his right temple, thin and white and exactly the shape of the piece of glass that had caught him when the wall came down 20 years ago. The worst part was that she recognized his hands, long-fingered, calloused in the specific way of someone who'd spent decades learning to use them as weapons. The worst part was that a terrified 8-year-old boy had become a sergeant major, which meant the system had taken him and shaped him and turned his trauma into duty, and she'd done that. Her extraction had done that. Her hands, pulling him from rubble, had set him on the path to becoming the man who was now lying sedated in front of her, broken by the very country that had saved him. She didn't let her face change. Her hands didn't shake as she adjusted his sedation drip, checking the midazolam infusion, verifying the propofol dosing. Her voice remained neutral when she spoke to the respiratory therapist about the ventilator settings. She was a professional. She was invisible. She was exactly what 15 years of discipline had trained her to be. "You're taking a special interest in this patient, Nurse Ross." Whitfield's voice came from behind her, and she didn't turn. She finished documenting the vital signs before responding, writing the numbers in the chart with the kind of careful deliberation that suggested she'd heard nothing unusual. 94% O2 saturation. Heart rate 78, regular. Temperature 37.2. Blood pressure stable at 118/62. Combat patient, she said quietly. Pneumothorax. Requires close monitoring. All our patients require close monitoring. Whitfield had moved into the room proper now, and she could smell his cologne, something expensive and overly present, the kind of fragrance that announced arrival like a warning. That's what protocols are for. That's why we have procedures. Danielle turned to face him, and her face was carefully blank. Whitfield was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. His jawline was sharp, his eyes that pale ice color, his bearing suggesting someone accustomed to being the smartest person in rooms. He wore a coat that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His badge identified him as Dr. M. Whitfield, surgical director. His voice carried the particular certainty of someone who'd never lived in actual uncertainty. "Monitoring," she said. "Yes, sir." She kept her voice deferential, careful, the vocal equivalent of making herself small. She'd spent 15 years perfecting this voice, the sound of someone who knew her place, who understood hierarchy, who accepted that some people were meant to lead and others were meant to follow protocol and document findings and keep their hands steady during crises without asking why. Whitfield studied her for a moment, and she could see him cataloguing this interaction like it was something to be filed away, reviewed later, compared against some standard he was maintaining. His presence made the air pressure change, like the beginning of a storm. "Just ensure we don't have any irregularities," he said. "I like my ICU by the book." He left. She watched him go, her face still blank, her heart still steady. In her scrub pocket, her fingers found the tarnished metal coin she kept there, the challenge coin that had been pressed into her hand by a man whose son she'd pulled from rubble, a man who'd thanked her in a language she didn't speak but understood anyway. The coin was worn smooth by 20 years of hands, scarred by the same blast that had scarred the boy in the hospital bed behind her. She didn't take it out. She just held it through the fabric, rubbing her thumb across the raised insignia, grounding herself in the weight of it. The morning progressed. Vega remained stable. His sedation held. The ventilator hummed its rhythmic cycle, filling his lungs, emptying them, filling them again. Around 11 a.m., she was standing at the med cart refilling an insulin drip when Whitfield appeared again, this time with the confidence of someone who'd decided on a course of action. "The vending machine," he said. It wasn't a request. She followed him down the corridor, understanding what was about to happen but unable to prevent it. The hallway was dim, quieter than the ICU proper, with less traffic and fewer witnesses. Whitfield inserted bills into the machine and waited for his selection, black coffee, no sugar, the drink of someone who wanted bitterness as a personality trait. "You understand your role here," he said. "Not a question. You're a nurse. Not a clinician. Not a decision-maker. You execute protocols. You follow orders. You keep your observations to yourself unless they fit into the proper channels." Danielle didn't respond immediately. She was waiting for the insult. It came. "I don't appreciate you playing soldier with the Marine patients," Whitfield said. His voice was smooth, conversational, the tone of someone delivering criticism in a way designed to be maximally demoralizing. It's unprofessional. It confuses the hierarchy. It suggests you think you're something you're not. The words landed in the silence. Around them, the hospital hummed with its normal rhythm, distant alarms, footsteps on tile, the soft pneumatic hiss of automatic doors opening somewhere down the corridor. Danielle's hands were steady. Her face was blank. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, deferential, exactly what he expected. "I understand, Dr. Whitfield." "Good," he said. He retrieved his coffee, and the smile he offered was the kind that didn't reach his eyes. "If you continue overstepping your role with this particular patient, I'll have security escort you out." "Clear." "Clear," she said. He walked away, satisfied. He'd established dominance. He'd set boundaries. He'd made clear what the hierarchy was and where she fit in it. It was the standard move of someone who'd spent a career understanding that power was about making others feel small. Danielle turned back toward the ICU, her face still neutral, her pulse still calm, her breathing still controlled. She would not cry. She would not tremble. She would not do anything that gave him satisfaction. But when she finished her shift 4 hours later, when the day nurse had taken over monitoring Vega's vitals, when she documented her final notes and processed her last medication orders, she found herself in the supply closet on the back side of the ICU. The fluorescent light in here flickered irregularly, casting the shelves of gauze and bandages and 4 kits in stuttering illumination. She pulled the tarnished challenge coin from her pocket. The metal was warm from her body heat. She could see the insignia on one side, a bird in flight, wings spread, impossible to read clearly because the metal was so worn. On the other side, something that had once been text but was now only texture, the letters worn smooth by decades of hands. Vega's father had pressed this into her palm before the extraction. Before she'd pulled his 8-year-old son from rubble. Before everything had changed. She gripped it until her knuckles went white, until the edges of the coin pressed small crescents into her palm, until the pain was something she could focus on instead of the particular, precise flavor of being diminished by someone who had no idea who he was talking to. Her breath remained steady. Her jaw clenched but didn't tremble. Her hands were still hands that had held lives together, that had performed direct cardiac massage through open chest cavities, that had intubated patients in field hospitals by touch alone when the lights went out and the world became darkness and pure muscle memory. Whitfield was very small. She was learning this in the supply closet with the flickering light and the tarnished coin pressing crescents into her palm. Whitfield was small in a way that required making other people feel small to feel large himself. He was small in a way that couldn't see the person standing in front of him because he was too busy seeing the shape he'd decided she was. She opened her hand. The coin had left marks in her skin. She put it back in her pocket, turned off the light, and walked back to room 412 to check on her patient, the boy she'd pulled from rubble, the sergeant major she was now permitted to take care of only if she did it invisibly, quietly, by the book. The night shift began at 7 p.m. She would be there. The night shift began at 7 p.m. She would be there. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of a sinking stone. Danielle had worked enough hospital cycles to recognize when the whispers started, the subtle shift in how residents glanced away, how attendings held their charts closer when she passed. Word had circulated through Seattle General's corridors like an infection with no cure. Dr. Marcus Whitfield had scheduled grand rounds at 10 a.m., and everyone knew she would be the subject. She arrived 30 minutes early, because that's what she did. She arrived early. She stayed late. She asked no one for anything. The conference room was already filling, 36 residents in white coats, senior attendings in darker blue, interns crowding the back wall like school children waiting for punishment. The air smelled of strong coffee and the particular anxiety that only academic medicine could produce. Danielle slipped into a seat in the back row, hands folded in her lap, her body language broadcasting absolute neutrality. She had sat in rooms like this before, though those rooms had been in forward operating bases, and the consequences had been measured in lives, not careers. Whitfield entered with the swagger of a man who believed his intelligence preceded him through doorways. He carried a wireless remote, and his smile had the quality of a shark surfacing toward bait. "Let's discuss Nurse Ross and her creative interpretations of protocol," he announced, his voice carrying the tone of someone about to deliver a lecture on incompetence to a captive audience. Her name hung in the air like an accusation. The first slide projected onto the screen behind him showed her patient notes, Vega's vitals, her handwriting in black ink, the chronology of her care over the past 48 hours. "Notice the frequency of vital sign checks," Whitfield continued, moving the cursor to highlight timestamps. "Hospital protocol dictates assessment every 2 hours. Nurse Ross apparently believes her own clinical judgment supersedes 14 years of departmental standards." He didn't say 15 years. That omission was deliberate. Every word Whitfield chose was a tool, and he knew how to swing them. "Vitals checked at 0730, 0815, 0902, 0945. Excessive. Neurotic, one might say." A resident in the third row shifted uncomfortably. Nobody laughed. Whitfield advanced to the next slide, a high-resolution image of her chart annotations. "Here we see an authorized psychiatric assessment. The patient expressed concern about nightmares. A nurse's role is documentation and reporting, not therapy. Yet here, Nurse Ross has spent approximately 17 minutes counseling a patient about PTSD symptoms." His voice dropped lower, adopting the tone of someone sharing a shameful secret. "I wonder if perhaps she fancies herself a physician. Perhaps she watched too many military dramas and decided she could practice psychology from a bedside chair." The room was dead silent now. The fluorescent lights hummed their electric song, indifferent to what was happening beneath them. Danielle's jaw muscles tightened, the only visible response her body allowed. Her hands remained folded. Her breathing remained steady. In her mind, she was calculating angles and sight lines, a habit she had trained into her nervous system across 20 years of operations. The emergency exits were 2 doors to her left. Whitfield stood approximately 12 feet away. She could reach him in 2.3 seconds if she needed to, though the idea was absurd. She would never do that. She would never give him the satisfaction. Over a 15-year career, Whitfield continued, now deliberately including the full duration, Nurse Ross has developed certain attachments to her patients. It clouds judgment. It compromises objectivity. He turned to face the audience directly, his body language now that of a man delivering hard truths for everyone's benefit. "We are healers, not saviors. The moment we begin to believe we can save them all, that we can be more than our role, that's when mistakes happen. That's when protocols exist for a reason." One of the senior attendings made a note on his clipboard. Danielle saw him do it. The motion carried its own message. Whitfield closed his presentation. "Thank you, Nurse Ross, for this teaching opportunity. I trust we're all reminded of the importance of professional boundaries." He didn't look at her when he said it. That was intentional too. Looking at her would have given her presence, and Whitfield was denying her presence, systematizing her invisibility through the clinical authority of his words. The residents filed out slowly, avoiding her eyes. The older attendings lingered, talking amongst themselves in low voices. Danielle waited until the room was empty, truly empty, not just socially empty, before she stood and walked back to the ICU. Her scrubs were clean. Her hands were steady. Her expression remained what it had always been, a perfectly calibrated mask that revealed nothing of the pressure building beneath her ribs like a storm system forming over open water. The next day, she was updating Vega's medications on the 3rd floor when she heard Whitfield's voice calling from down the corridor. She didn't turn. She simply continued her work, hands moving through the familiar choreography of hospital routine, checking the infusion pump, verifying the fall line, documenting the time. Footsteps approached. Male footsteps. Multiple sets. Security, she thought, recognizing the particular rhythm of their gait, the deliberate heaviness of men wearing utility belts with 10 pounds of equipment. Nurse Ross. Whitfield's voice had taken on a different quality now, official, recorded in the tone of someone creating a paper trail. "I need to speak with you." She turned to face him. Whitfield stood with 2 security officers flanking him like bookends. He held a folder in his right hand. The folder contained her personnel file. "Your continued overstepping of your role has become a liability to this institution," he said, his voice loud enough for the nursing staff at the nearby station to hear. Volume was another tactic. He wanted witnesses. "If you continue to exceed your scope of practice, these officers will be instructed to escort you from the building permanently. Consider this your only warning. It will be documented in your file." She looked at Whitfield, then at the folder, then back at Whitfield. When she spoke, her voice was flat and precise, each word delivered like a separate piece of evidence. "Understood, Doctor." That was all. No argument. No defense. No emotional reaction. Just a statement of comprehension, as if she were confirming the time of day or the spelling of a medication name. It was the perfect response. It gave him nothing. No tears. No trembling. No plea for understanding. Just professional acknowledgement, delivered with the composure of someone who had been trained by institutional settings far more demanding than any hospital. Whitfield's jaw tightened. He had been expecting something more. A reaction. Some crack in her composure that would validate his narrative, that she was unstable, emotional, unreliable. Instead, he got compliance. It was a response designed to infuriate someone like Whitfield, because it left no room for escalation. How could you punish someone for accepting your terms without argument? The security officers looked at each other. They had been brought here to perform theater, and the audience had refused to applaud. After a moment, Whitfield turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing with the particular rhythm of a man who felt he had won something, though he couldn't quite name what. Danielle finished documenting Vega's vitals. Every number was precise. 38.2 degrees Celsius. Heart rate 78. Blood pressure 124/82. Oxygen saturation 98% on room air. Her handwriting was steady, each letter formed with the care of someone who understood that documentation was armor, that the written record would survive long after voices faded and memories warped and reputations dissolved like salt in water. 5 minutes later, she was in the supply closet. It was a narrow space, shelves stacked with saline bags, bandage boxes, rubber tubing coiled like snakes. The door sealed behind her with a soft pneumatic hiss, and she was alone. Truly alone. She reached into her scrub pocket and withdrew the tarnished challenge coin. It was the size of a quarter, heavy for its dimensions, its surface worn smooth by 20 years of handling and worry. One side bore the insignia of her old unit, SEAL Team 3, the trident and anchor rendered in oxidized silver. The other side held Arabic script, the words her own name in that language, inscribed by the hands of a man who had died 6,000 miles away from his own grave. She gripped the coin until her knuckles turned white, the metal pressing hard against her palm. The pressure was information. The pain was data. Her breathing came slow and controlled, for counts in, hold for 4, for counts out, the pattern she had taught herself in a place where panic killed faster than bullets ever could. Her eyes remained open. She did not blink. She did not let the pressure behind her sternum become anything other than what it was, energy contained, potential energy waiting to be converted into motion. Outside the supply closet, Seattle General continued its rhythms. Monitors beeped. For pumps hummed their mechanical songs. Nurses called to each other in the shorthand of people who had learned to communicate in fragments. Somewhere on the 3rd floor, Dr. Whitfield was documenting her insubordination in the official record, building a case with the precision of someone constructing a legal argument. He didn't know who he was documenting. He was looking at 15 years of service records and seeing a problem. He was looking at a woman who followed his threats with obedience and seeing weakness. He was dead wrong about that. But that wouldn't become apparent until later, when the walls of his understanding began to crack. Danielle released her grip on the coin and returned it to her pocket. She exhaled once, deeply, and when she opened the supply closet door, she was exactly who she had been before, a nurse, steady and competent, ready to begin the night shift at 7 p.m. Just another night. Just another 12 hours of maintaining the boundary between chaos and order, between life and everything that tried to steal it away. She had no idea what was about to walk through those doors. 2 days after Vega's admission, the monitors had become her metronome. Danielle moved through the ICU with the kind of economy that came from years of keeping people alive, every step deliberate, every motion purposeful. The ventilator hissed its mechanical rhythm. The heart monitor beeped its steady pulse. 43 other patients filled the ward around them, but her hands were only on one. She was adjusting the chest tube drainage when Vega's eyes flickered open. Actually open. Not the fragmented consciousness of sedation, but something deeper. Something aware. His pupils tracked her hand as she worked, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, his jaw tightened. Bagram. His voice came out like wind through gravel. Barely audible. You were there. Danielle's hands didn't stop moving. She calibrated the suction pressure on the drain, her movements as smooth as water. But something in her chest seized like a fist clenching around her heart. 20 years. 20 years of that name locked away in a compartment she never opened, and here it was, whispered from a 180-pound Marine who shouldn't have known anything except pain and medications and the slow work of healing. Save your strength, Sergeant Major. She kept her voice level. Professional. You're still on sedation protocol. But his eyes followed her face with the intensity of someone who had just recognized a ghost. The girl. With the bandage on her hand. Baghdad, no, Bagram. The rubble. You pulled me out. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Danielle simply continued her work, checking the tube patency, verifying the output color was transitioning correctly from deep red to lighter pink, confirming his O2 sat was holding steady at 94%. The kind of routine competence that made her invisible. The kind that had kept her alive for 2 decades. Vega's eyes closed again. The morphine was pulling him back under. Thank you, he whispered, and then he was gone again, drift back into the pharmaceutical darkness where the past couldn't touch him. She was still standing there, hand resting on the fall line, when the doors to the ICU burst open. Not the sliding glass doors. Not the normal entrance. The emergency exit doors, the ones that opened onto the staff corridor, slammed inward like a battering ram hitting a castle wall. The alarm shrieked for 2 seconds before someone cut it. Danielle turned. Her hands moved automatically to a neutral position. Her shoulders squared. Her breathing slowed. 3 men in tactical gear stood in the ICU doorway. Real tactical gear, not hospital security, not administration, not anyone wearing a Seattle General badge. These were operators. Body armor rated for rifle rounds. Weapons secured at their sides with professional attachment points. Faces dark with intention. The kind of men who moved through hostile territory for a living. The lead operative was broad through the shoulders and carried himself like someone who had given orders in places where not obeying those orders meant death. His eye swept across the ICU ward, found Vega in bed 7, and stopped. He didn't point. He didn't need to. Marine Sergeant Major Carlos Vega. Not a question. A statement. A retrieval order. You're being released into our custody. Pack his belongings. We're moving in 60 seconds. Every nurse in the ward had frozen. The 4 medications continued dripping. The monitors continued beeping. The world kept spinning, but nobody moved. Danielle could feel it, that specific silence that comes before violence, the way a predator's muscles lock right before the strike. She stepped forward. Not aggressively. Not defiantly. Just sideways, positioning her body between the tactical operators and the bed where Vega lay unconscious, still recovering from 3 emergency surgeries that had put his ribcage back together like a shattered puzzle. Sergeant Major Vega is a critical care patient, she said. Her voice didn't change tone. Didn't waver. Didn't ask. He's not cleared for transport. His lung capacity is at 60%. His post-operative day 2 with active chest tube drainage. Move him now, you collapse his lung. That's medical fact, not opinion. The lead operative's jaw tightened. He took one step forward. Then another. He was close enough now that she could smell the gun oil and the ozone from defibrillator use, probably from another facility, another situation, another life he'd saved or taken. Stand down, This isn't a negotiation. Danielle didn't step back. The operative was 6'2", easily 220 pounds of muscle and training and the kind of certainty that came from operating in theaters where weakness was fatal. She was 5 feet 8 inches and 145 pounds with a morphine drip still running in her arm from her last surgery and scar tissue from burns that were 20 years old. The math didn't matter. I can't let you move him, she said quietly. Just the two of them now, the world narrowed down to this one moment, this one choice, this one line she was drawing on the tile floor. I won't. The operative's hand came up. Not reaching for her. Not yet. Just positioning. Signaling to his team. His eyes never left her face, like he was reading something written on her skin, something that told him exactly how serious this was and exactly what she was willing to do. Behind her, Vega slept on. The monitors beeped. The ventilator breathed for him in its mechanical rhythm. The operative said one word, fire. The first round hit her right shoulder and spun her sideways. The impact was like being struck by a sledgehammer wrapped in ice. No pain yet, just physics. Just momentum and velocity and the way her body responded to the rules of force. She didn't fall. Her legs locked. Her hand reached out and gripped the bedside rail. The second round came so fast she barely registered it. Center mass, 3 inches left of her sternum. This time the physics was different. This time something ruptured. Something that was supposed to stay sealed cracked open like an egg. She could feel it, warm, urgent, wrong. Blood filling spaces it shouldn't be in. Tissue damage flowering through her ribcage like flowers opening in fast motion. She was still standing. The third round took her in the lower abdomen. She finally understood physics completely then. Understood why her grandmother had said that the most dangerous thing a human could be was something with nothing left to lose. She twisted. She moved her body so the bullets would hit her instead of the man in the bed. Muscle memory that had been trained into her by instructors whose names she'd never learned in places she could never mention. The room tilted. The floor seemed very close. She could see the white of Vega's bedsheet, still pristine, still untouched by the violence happening 3 feet away. She could see the monitors. She could see everything with crystal clarity, the way pain sharpened the world to a point so bright it was almost beautiful. Security came from somewhere. She heard boots, shouts, the sound of bodies hitting bodies. The tactical operators went down hard, trained to expect medical workers, not expecting this level of response. Her vision was fragmenting now, like watching a television with bad reception. Black spots. Stars. The beeping of the monitors getting very loud, very urgent. She needed to. There was something she needed to do. Her hand found the code blue button on the wall. She could barely feel her fingers. She pressed it anyway. The alarm shrieked. The response was automatic, trained, rehearsed, instantaneous. Nurses from the step-down unit, residents from the floors above, the crash cart rolling in like cavalry. The young resident, Dr. Patel, was standing frozen in the corner. The one Danielle had mentored through her 3rd month, who still looked at patients like they were people instead of problems. Still looked terrified. Danielle's voice came out wrong. Thick. Like it was traveling through water. But it was clear. Commands were always clear. Composure was always about clarity. Endotracheal tube. Size 7.5. His post-op, so expect resistance. Fentanyl 100 micrograms for sedation. Succinylcholine 100 milligrams for paralysis. 60 seconds. She couldn't see anymore. The room was becoming static. Go. Someone was pressing on her chest. Someone was asking her name. Someone was calling for a surgeon, trauma team, someone get the attending. But she heard the ventilator switch. Heard the hiss of the tube going in. Heard Dr. Patel say, "Tube's in. We have good chest rise. Breath sounds bilateral." Heard Vega still sleeping. Still alive. Still breathing, even if it wasn't his own effort anymore. Then nothing but the red spreading across the white tile like an accusation, like a question, like an answer she'd known was coming her whole life. The monitors screaming. The lights above her face so bright they burned through her closed eyelids. And somewhere in that darkness, the sound of Dr. Whitfield's voice on the phone, not shouting, not panicked, just calm and methodical. "I need to speak with the board chairman." "Yes, I know it's his golf day. This is about liability. The nurse who created this incident needs to be contained before she destroys our certification. Yes, I have already drafted preliminary documentation. Termination effective immediately when she stabilizes. Her employment is a liability we cannot afford." The phone call happened. It definitely happened. She heard it with some part of her consciousness that was still operating outside her body, still watching, still calculating. But that part belonged to someone else now. Some other version of herself. Some other life. The monitors screamed their steady rhythm, beep, 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 our machines doing the work her body couldn't yet manage. Danielle lay in the recovery room, chest bandaged tight, 2 drainage tubes emerging from between her ribs like mechanical roots. Pink fluid collected in the bulbs. Breath came shallow. The shoulder wound pulled with every inhale. The abdomen felt hollowed out. She stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the acoustic holes without moving her head, because moving her head meant acknowledging the pain, and acknowledging the pain meant acknowledging that the shots had been real, and the blood had been real, and she had collapsed on that floor knowing her career was over before the bullets even stopped moving through her. A young nurse entered, Sarah, one of the residents Danielle had mentored 2 years ago, showing her how to read a difficult foresight, how to hold a patient's hand through the moment before anesthesia took them. Sarah's eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. She didn't speak. She just checked the chest tube outputs, her hands trembling as she documented the drainage, and when she thought Danielle wasn't watching, she let a tear slip down her face and quickly wiped it away. The gesture broke something, not visibly, never visibly, but in the space beneath the composure. A girl who had learned compassion from her teaching now grieving a teacher. Danielle closed her eyes and said nothing, because saying nothing was the only thing she still controlled. What she didn't know was that Dr. Whitfield was already on the 4th hole at the Seattle Country Club, his golf ball sitting perfect on the fairway, when he made the phone call. He waited until he was certain no one was within earshot. The board chairman was 3 holes ahead, unreachable on the green, then dialed. The chairman's phone rang in his pocket. Whitfield didn't wait for pleasantries. "We have a serious problem at the hospital. That nurse from ICU, the one who got shot. She's unstable. Dangerous. We need to move on termination before she recovers." The chairman listened. Whitfield kept walking, kept talking, kept painting the picture he'd begun constructing the moment her blood hit the tile floor, a liability, a hero complex, someone who had compromised patient safety through reckless behavior. "I'm documenting everything," Whitfield said. "I'll have a complete case ready by Friday." He hung up and lined up his next shot, the ball ascending in a clean arc against the San Antonio sky. Back at the hospital, Whitfield activated the second phase. He called Danielle's nursing school, the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio, and spoke to her former instructors, framing his inquiry as routine professional evaluation. His voice remained concerned, regretful, helpful. He asked about her psychological fitness during her training years. Had anyone noticed obsessive behavior? Boundary issues? An inclination toward rule breaking? One instructor remembered Danielle only distantly. Another, now retired, didn't recall her at all. But Whitfield didn't need actual damaging information. He needed the appearance of investigation, the paper trail of questions that would suggest problems, would create a narrative of concern and due diligence. He hired an external investigator, a consultant firm that specialized in hospital employee misconduct reviews, and handed them a sealed envelope containing 15 years of Danielle's charting. Look for pattern deviations, he instructed. Anything that suggests she prioritizes her own judgment over protocol. The investigator, who charged $2,000 per day, knew exactly what narrative was being requested. They would find it. By Wednesday morning, the folder was assembled. Whitfield had hand-selected 17 charts from Danielle's 15-year tenure, occasions when she had adjusted medication timing by 5 minutes, when she had recommended a patient be moved to a different bed placement despite the resident's initial resistance, when she had stayed 40 minutes past her shift to monitor a cardiac patient when the night nurse hadn't yet arrived. Ordinary clinical judgment. Exemplary bedside care. Transformed on paper into a pattern of insubordination, boundary violations, and unilateral decision-making inconsistent with hospital hierarchy. He wrote the summary himself, documented pattern of protocol deviation and emotional instability, evidenced by reckless heroic intervention during ICU breach incident, suggests unsuitability for continued employment and potential liability. He signed it. He sealed it. He felt the rightness of it, the satisfaction of a problem being methodically, professionally dismantled. Thursday afternoon, while Danielle was still counting ceiling tiles through a haze of morphine, the board chairman and the hospital's legal counsel walked into her recovery room. They didn't sit. They didn't speak softly. The chairman held the termination packet, 23 pages, and read the decision as if presenting test results. Gross negligence. Emotional unfitness. Reckless endangerment of patients and staff. Effective immediately. Her employment was terminated. Her privileges were revoked. Her credentials were flagged for review by the Texas Board of Nursing. She had 7 days to return all hospital property. Danielle listened without moving. Her monitor showed a slight elevation in heart rate, but nothing more. She didn't ask questions. She didn't protest. She simply nodded once, the motion barely visible, and when they left, she closed her eyes again and returned to counting. The discharge papers came Friday morning. A security escort, the same veteran guard who had worked nights for 15 years, arrived to collect her belongings from her locker. His name was Mitchell. He had watched Danielle work those 15 years, had seen her move through the hospital with purpose, had witnessed the way patients' shoulders relaxed when she entered rooms. He couldn't look at her as she slowly changed from the hospital gown into street clothes, each movement pulling at the fresh sutures beneath her shirt. He carried her cardigan. He carried her bag. Protocol dictated one final step: return the bloodstained scrubs to hospital laundry for processing. Hospital property. Hospital responsibility. Hospital liability documented and filed away. The basement laundry room was a cavern of steam and heat and the chemical smell of industrial detergent, eucalyptus and bleach and something else, something like surrender. Mitchell wheeled her down in silence, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and positioned her workstation near the folding tables. "I'll wait by the door," he said quietly. He was a kind man, a careful man, someone who understood that witness and respect were not always the same thing. Danielle pulled the scrubs from the bag. They were stiff. The blood had dried to rust-brown stains across the front, a visible map of where the bullets had entered, where she had bled out across the ICU floor, where she had still managed to keep her mind clear enough to save another life while losing everything else. She unfolded them carefully. The fabric made a papery sound. She began to fold them methodically, military corners, precise thirds, because even in the basement, even destroyed, she would do things correctly. The tarnished challenge coin was in the pocket. It had been there since Bagram, pressed into her hand by a dying man who said simply, "So you remember." Carlos Vega's father. Dead now for 20 years, his son alive and upstairs, his son alive because she had pulled him from rubble, because she had folded the right way, because she had always done things correctly. The coin fell from the pocket and clattered against the tile floor. It rang out like a bell in the steam-thick room, a sound like endings. Danielle stared at it for a long moment, chest rising and falling, shoulders that had held positions in Helmand Province now bowed over a wheelchair in a hospital basement. She didn't reach for it. She couldn't bend. She was too exhausted to retrieve what she had already lost. She just left it there, the coin, the symbol, the last piece of proof that she had ever been anything other than the woman they said she was, unstable, reckless, a liability, just a nurse who had overstepped, who had broken protocol, who deserved to be erased. Mitchell watched from the doorway. He saw the coin fall. He saw Danielle's stillness. He saw the moment when her hands stopped moving and her shoulders curved inward like someone learning to be small. After she wheeled herself toward the exit, after her silhouette disappeared into the hallway beyond, he walked quietly to the spot where the coin had landed. He picked it up. The metal was warm from the laundry room heat. One side bore an insignia he didn't recognize, a soaring bird, something military, something that meant something to someone. He turned it over. No name. No rank. Just the weight of it, heavy in his palm. He pocketed it. Some things, he understood, shouldn't be filed away. Upstairs in the executive wing, Dr. Whitfield was already crafting his statement for the press. Unstable employee with hero complex created dangerous situation, he was dictating to his secretary, practicing the tone of regrettable necessity, the voice of someone who had been forced to do the hard thing. His secretary, a woman named Patricia who had worked for 5 department heads across 23 years, was taking notes because that was her job, but her jaw was clenched and her fingers moved too fast across the keyboard. She knew what Whitfield had done. Everyone who worked the administrative floors knew. But knowing and stopping were different things. The power differential was geometric. She continued typing. Whitfield continued talking, outlining his media strategy, preparing his defense before any accusation had been made. He was already rehearsing why he hadn't known Danielle was anything other than what he'd believed, just a civilian nurse with delusions of importance, a woman who had desperately needed to feel significant. He was already preparing the world to believe him. That was when his secretary's phone rang. The hospital operator. A situation downstairs. Military presence in the parking lot. A helicopter. Whitfield waved his hand dismissively. Handle it. Patricia tried again, her voice careful but urgent. Sir, they're asking they said they're here for someone named Chief Sandstorm. The room went very quiet. Whitfield's pen stopped moving. He looked up, and for the first time in the conversation, Patricia saw uncertainty cross his face like a shadow. Tell them, he said, voice returning to its normal register, tell them the unstable nurse is no longer our problem. He turned back to his statement. Patricia stood there for a moment longer, holding the phone, knowing something was about to arrive that would make his problem substantially worse. Then she set the phone down and walked toward the elevator. For days after the shooting, Danielle rolled through the hospital lobby in a wheelchair that felt like a throne made of broken glass. Every breath cost her. The bandages under her scrubs pulled tight across her shoulder, her ribs, her abdomen, 3 entry wounds that the surgeons had stitched with the precision of people who understood that some damage couldn't be undone. Security flanked her like she was a prisoner being released, not a decorated officer whose record they still didn't know existed. The laundry attendant, Marcus, 30 years night shift, grey at the temples, pretended not to see her when she returned to collect her things. He busied himself with sorting reds from whites, his hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone desperate to avoid eye contact. Danielle wheeled herself to the blood-stained scrubs piled on the steel table. They were her scrubs. Her blood had soaked through the fabric in 3 distinct patterns, a starburst at the shoulder, a spreading dark bloom across the ribs, a third pooling low on the abdomen where the 3rd round had punched through. She picked up the first pair, held it to the light. The bleach hadn't removed all of it. Some stains don't come clean. She folded them anyway, muscle memory taking over, left seam to right seam, sleeves tucked inward, a perfect rectangle. The motion sent needles through her shoulder. She didn't stop. The tarnished challenge coin sat in her scrub pocket, worn smooth by 20 years of her hands. Vega's father had pressed it into her palm in a rubble field outside Bagram, told her in Pashto that she was worthy of it, that one day she would understand what it meant. She had carried it every day since. It slipped from her pocket as she folded the final pair of scrubs, hit the laundry room floor with a sound like a single heartbeat striking steel. The coin rolled across the tile, caught under a cart, stopped spinning. Danielle stared at it. Marcus moved to retrieve it, but she raised one hand, just one, because lifting both arms sent white fire across her chest, and he understood. Some things had to be picked up by the person who dropped them. She wheeled herself to the coin, bent forward with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been reassembled by surgeons, and closed her palm around it. The metal was cold. Familiar. In her chest, something that had been wound tight for 4 days loosened by a fraction of a millimeter. That was when the building shook. Not an earthquake. Worse. The rotor wash of a helicopter, close enough that the fluorescent panels in the ceiling rattled like teeth. The sound came from directly overhead, a deep mechanical thrumming that bypassed her ears and went straight through her bones. Marcus froze, a basket of linen suspended in his arms. In the distance, the wail of security alarms. The building shook again. Someone was landing in the parking lot. Danielle gripped the coin tight enough that its edges bit into her palm. The lobby erupted for minutes later. 6 Marines in dress blues, not camouflage, uniforms pressed so sharp they could cut glass, medals gleaming across their chests like warnings. They moved through the hospital like apex predators through water, boots striking tile in perfect unison, their presence making the fluorescent lights seem pale. The leader, a captain with a jawline carved from granite, stopped at the information desk and spoke 4 words that echoed through the atrium. "Where's Chief Sandstorm?" The lobby went dead silent. That wasn't her name anymore. That hadn't been her name for 20 years. That was a call sign from another life, from operations that never happened in places that officially didn't exist, from a woman who had ceased to breathe the moment her record was scrubbed and filed under classified. The hospital staff froze. Orderlies stopped moving. A patient waiting in the ER actually looked up from his phone. The veteran security guard, Earl, who had worked the night desk since 1995 and had seen exactly nothing surprise him in 3 decades, went pale. His hand trembled as he reached for the radio, not to call security, but to answer the question. His voice crackled across every unit in the hospital. "That's Master Chief Petty Officer Ross, Navy Special Warfare. She's in the basement laundry." The words hung in the air like a detonation. Within 90 seconds, 6 Marines stood outside the laundry room door. Danielle was still holding the challenge coin, still in her wheelchair, still bleeding slightly through her bandages where she'd bent forward too fast. The captain stepped aside. A general entered. Full dress whites, 2 stars on each shoulder, eyes like someone who had ordered men into places where the sun never reached. He looked at Danielle, really looked, seeing past the wheelchair and the bandages and the civilian scrubs to something underneath, and began to speak. His voice filled the laundry room, and somehow also filled the lobby where 200 hospital staff had gathered above, pressed against the stairwell, desperate to hear. Master Chief Petty Officer Danielle Ross. 3 silver stars for valor under fire in Bagram province. 2 purple hearts for wounds sustained in combat operations. For bronze stars with valor for direct action in support of Allied forces. Your record was classified 20 years ago. Your service is classified now. Your medals are classified. But what you did 2 days ago, taking enemy fire to protect a fellow service member, executing an emergency procedure under threat of death, saving the life of Sergeant Major Carlos Vega, that is not classified anymore. That is witnessed. That is written. That is permanent. He paused. The silence was so thick you could operate in it. From somewhere above came the sound of a wheelchair moving. Then the creak of it stopping. Then Sergeant Major Carlos Vega's voice, raw and certain, speaking into the void. 20 years ago, I was 8 years old. My father was dead. The city was rubble. She pulled me from under concrete and told me I would live. Told me I would be safe. Held my hand while helicopters fired and people screamed. 20 years later, I served because of her. 2 days ago, she took 3 bullets meant for me. Stood between me and death like she was made of steel. She is a hero. She is the reason I breathe. She is the reason my children will breathe. And I watched her get fired for it. The room above erupted. Not in applause, something quieter and more dangerous. The sound of 200 people understanding that they had been on the wrong side of something they would spend the rest of their lives regretting. The general turned to face the stairwell, toward the crowd, toward the cameras that local news had somehow gotten into the building, and his voice became edged. Dr. Marcus Whitfield, step forward. There was a pause. Then the sound of feet moving. Reluctant. Afraid. You dismissed a decorated Master Chief from her position. You interfered with treatment. You weaponized this hospital's policies to retaliate against a service member. Your medical license is under immediate investigation by NCIS. Your employment at Seattle General is terminated effective now. You will never practice in a military-adjacent facility again. Collect your things and leave. 2 uniformed officers, actual military, not hospital security, stepped forward. One took Whitfield's arm. Not roughly. Just firmly. Final. His face was bone white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air that had suddenly become thin. The walk to the exit took for minutes. Local news cameras caught every second. The footage would be uploaded within the hour. By morning it would have 14 million views. 6 months later, Marcus Whitfield stood in a community college gymnasium in suburban Austin, rolling CPR dummies into a plastic storage bin while students filed out of the room. His name tag read, Instructor. His salary was $14 an hour. On a muted television mounted in the corner, a new segment played on rotation, Danielle in dress whites at the Pentagon, her posture perfect despite the scars underneath, a 4-star admiral pinning the Navy Cross to her chest. The decoration caught the light like it was made of condensed starlight. Whitfield didn't look up. He'd learned not to look at that particular video. Danielle's physical therapy had taken 4 months. Walter Reed Medical Center, the Marine Corps and Navy coordinating her care with the precision they reserved for their own. Sergeant Major Vega had visited weekly, bringing his wife and 2 children, bringing the kind of grace that comes from surviving something together. He'd started a foundation for Afghan war orphans, children like he had been, children like the ones Danielle had saved in the rubble outside Bagram. Every dollar raised carried the weight of that challenge coin, that moment in the dust, that promise made to a child who grew up to serve. The coin itself sat on her bedside table during physical therapy sessions, where she relearned to walk without limping, where her hands relearned to steady themselves, where her body remembered that it was still capable of more than breathing. The laundry attendant, Marcus, who had 30 years of night shift behind him and the kind of loyalty that doesn't get taught, had mailed it to her with a note written in careful block letters, "Heroes don't leave these behind." On the day of the ceremony, Danielle stood in the Hall of Heroes at the Pentagon. The dress whites fit like a second skin. Her posture was parade ground perfect. 200 service members filled the hall, active duty, retired, Medal of Honor recipients, the kind of crowd that didn't gather unless the occasion was absolute. A 4-star admiral approached with the Navy Cross on a blue ribbon. The second highest military decoration in the nation. For extraordinary heroism in taking enemy fire to protect a fellow service member. Sergeant Major Vega stood in the front row in full dress blues, his children beside him, tears running freely down his weathered face. When the admiral draped the medal over Danielle's neck, the room, 200 warriors, professional killers, people trained to witness without reaction, erupted. Not in applause. In something older. The sound of truth being honored. Later, a glass display case in the Pentagon's classified archives held her decorations. 3 silver stars arranged like a hierarchy of valor. 2 purple hearts for the price of survival. For bronze stars with valor for the names she would never be allowed to speak. And centered among them, polished to a mirror shine after 20 years of being tarnished, the challenge coin that Vega's father had pressed into her hand in a rubble field outside Bagram. His name was engraved beneath it in English and Pashto, for those who give everything. When a group of young recruits toured the Pentagon a week later, Danielle was asked to speak. The question came from a private, barely 20, eyes bright with the kind of idealism that gets tested in the field. "What would you say to people who call you a hero?" She reached up and touched the coin, now on a chain around her neck, sitting against her chest where the bullets had entered. True heroism is what you do when the world stops watching. The private nodded, understanding something that most people spend their entire lives never learning. In a community college gymnasium in Austin, the television kept playing. Dr. Whitfield rolled the last CPR dummy into storage and didn't look at the screen. Like this video if you support our troops. And if you or someone you love has served, let us know in the comments, we'd be honored to hear from you. Subscribe and let's get back to the story.